pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Crester, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Berquist?
Present.
Ms. Castillo? Present. Ms. Corso? Present. Mr. Luca? Present. Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Cresser?
Here.
Mr. Lamarca?
Here.
Mr. Mack?
Here.
Mr. Meredith?
Here.
Mr. Melky?
Here.
Ms. Murray? Absent. Ms. Ortino? Here. And Mr. Whelan?
Here.
And Ms. Yandel? Here.
I am going to use the president's prerogative early in this effort by reversing the agenda by one direction. Some of you may consider that out of order. I can tell you that Mrs. Kressler considers me out of order most of the time. So instead of doing my welcome speech, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself, and then I'll do my welcome speech.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Berquist. I'm broker owner of Brookshire Hathaway Step Mill Real Estate and 35-year resident in the city.
My name's Jade Castile. I'm the business manager with United Way of Erie County and recently moved back to the city, just looking to get involved in the community again.
I'm Judy Corso, retired school board member, art walk initiator, and lifelong Sandusky resident.
Adriana Guerra. I work for Morningstar Inc., customer success manager. I grew up in Huron and have been a resident of Sandusky for almost 4 years now.
Alex Jones. I work as the parent community involvement person at Sandusky City Schools. Am not a lifelong resident, moved here when I was in middle school, so sort of adopted by the city, but I've been very, very proud to call Sandusky home for the last 16 years now.
I'm Kirk Cresser, born and raised here in Sandusky, and I work at Groff Funeral Home.
Tom Lamarca, former licensed real estate broker, owner, insurance broker, retired, enjoying it, lifelong Sandusky resident.
Hi everyone, my name is David Mack. I work for Brady Signs as the operations manager. I live in Sandusky with my wife and 2 children.
Drew Meredith, Vice President of Operations and Marketing and Strategic Planning for Firelands Regional Medical Center, a lifelong resident of Sandusky.
Duff Milky, General Counsel for Cedar Fair. I've been living in Sandusky almost 30 years.
I'm Lisa Sortino. I'm one of the owners of LLV Group with my sisters. We own hotels in the area. I moved back to Sandusky almost 4 years ago, and happy to be here.
I'm Connor Whalen. I am a math teacher at Sandusky High School, and I'm a lifelong resident of Sandusky.
I'm Kima Yandel, and I bought a house 2 years ago in Sandusky because I love it, and I've been going back and forth between Seattle and Sandusky, managing my construction company, winding it down, and as of about 10 days ago, I'm permanently here. I don't have any residence in Seattle, so this is my home.
Thank you. I am going to speak for my second appointee, Melanie Murray, who's not with us this afternoon. She actually works as grown up in this community, and she works as the chief planner for Perkins Township. So I'm certain that she will be an asset to this committee, as all of you are. And I want to thank all of you for taking a chance on the city by taking on this role. This charter that you're about to review is really the framework. It's the blueprint for how our city operates. The people that authored this document did not expect it to be a stagnant document. We are not a stagnant city. That's why we're here. That's why we have this process. And interestingly enough, you don't, even as the president of the commission, you don't really bore into each of these sections until you have to. And I had to this last weekend to be ready for this charter review, and what I found was up until 1989, we didn't even have a formal process in place to review the charter. So in 1989, they passed an amendment to set in motion exactly what we're here today for. So in 1995 was the first time that we have a 5-year review. and we've had a 5-year review ever since then. Hence, we're doing that again here in 2020. My expectation is high for all of you. And that means that during this exercise, I expect you to review every paragraph in this document. That's not a tedious job because many of these things you will pass through very quickly. Some will require maybe no change at all. Others will require slight changes. And maybe you'll throw something entirely out and try something new or at least suggest something new. This is really a 3-step process, and perhaps you're all aware of it, but I think it's worth mentioning. The process starts with you 14 people, and that process is you review our charter, you make recommendations, you have to vote on those recommendations, and a majority rules in that. And then the amendments that you have a majority vote on, you pass those amendments to the City Commission. The City Commission then looks at what you're suggesting, and then we have to have a majority vote to accept those and to pass them on to all of our bosses, which is literally the residents of the city of Sandusky. We as a city will provide any resources that you desire to accomplish this. So we will make available to you any staff that we have, any outside or inside resources that we have. You have the luxury of having everyone somewhat at your beck and call. The only thing that I would ask is that you route those requests through our Commission Clerk, Kelly Kresser. She will make available to you, or she will run point for you on gaining any type of resources. If you need a speaker on an issue, if you want expert testimony on a specific issue, Kelly is very adept at pulling those kind of things together and making it available to you. The process that you've agreed to be a part of today is really meant to make us a better government. That's really why we're here, and I know that each of you will provide us with a thoughtful and a deliberative effort in going through this. It's not a quick process. I expect that you will come to some conclusions very quickly. Others, I think, will take some time. But I can assure you that those suggestions that you make, when you deliver them to the City Commission, we will take them very seriously. I want to thank all of you again for doing this, and I think the next order of business, turning this commission over to you members, is for you to elect a chairman and a vice chairman. I think that perhaps Clerk Kresser has communicated to each of you how that process works. Very, very simple process. Nominations for the chairman position will be first, and any one of you people sitting here can nominate anyone. You can nominate yourself to be the chairman, and if we have multiple people nominated for that position, we will have a voice vote on that from each of you. So I will open the floor amongst all of you for nominations for the chairman of this Charter Review Committee. Mr. LaMarca.
Mr. Brady, with Duff Milkey's prior experience, I would like to nominate Duff Milkey as the president or chairperson of the committee.
The only requirement is the person you nominate must be willing to accept that nomination. Mr. Milkey, are you willing to accept that?
Yes.
Are there any other nominations for chairperson of the committee?
I'll second that nomination.
Thank you. If there are no other nominations, the nominations are closed, and I believe it is by acclamation, but I think we'll have a voice vote just to make it very official. So I'll ask Clerk Kresser to call the roll.
Mr. Berquist?
Aye.
Ms. Castillo?
Aye.
Mrs. Corso?
Aye.
Ms. DeLuca?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Kresser?
Aye.
Mr. LaMarca?
Aye.
Mr. Mack?
Aye.
Mr. Meredith?
Aye.
Mr. Milkey?
Aye.
Ms. Sortino?
Aye.
Mr. Whelan?
Aye.
Ms. Yandel?
That election is by acclamation. Congratulations, Mr. Milkey, on becoming the chairman. And now I will open the floor for nominations for vice chairman.
I'd like to make Tom LaMarca.
Mr. LaMarca, are you willing to serve in that role?
Yes.
I'll second that.
Any additional nominations?
I'd nominate Mr. Meredith.
Are you willing to serve in that role, Mr. Meredith?
Yes.
Any other nominations? Now we will have a voice vote. Mr. LaMarca?
Not good. Did I miss anything?
So at this point, what I would do is realize that you're only gonna be voting for one person. So what we'll start with is, we'll put, since you were called out first, Mr. Lamarca, we'll put you up for vote. We have a panel of 14, the majority would be 8 votes. So we're looking to see if you get 8 votes, and then I'm assuming we'll do the same thing for Mr. Meredith. But understand, if he gets 8 votes too, that means somebody voted yes twice, so let's use our votes judiciously here.
Vote early and vote often.
That's right.
So why don't we start first with the votes for Mr. Lamarca, and you can say yes or no. I mean, you don't have to say.
Should there be a comment period if anybody
Yeah,
wants
if
to?
anybody wants to say anything.
Discussion? No discussion? Clerk Klesser, I believe you can call the roll.
Mr. Burke?
Just for the record, this is from Mr. Lamarca.
Yes. Mr. Berquist?
Yes.
Ms. Castillo?
Yes.
Ms. Corso?
Yes.
Mr. Luco?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Cresser?
No.
Mr. Lamarca?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Meredith?
No.
Mr. Melky?
No.
Ms. Sortino?
No.
Mr. Whalen?
No.
Ms. Yandel?
No.
Who kept track of the votes? I asked Kelly to do that, that's why I asked that.
There were 7 yays and 6 nays.
That would,
So there,
Now we need to go on for Mr. Meredith.
I will, Clerk Klesser will call the roll for Mr. Meredith.
Mr. Berquist?
No.
Ms. Castillo?
No.
Ms. Corso?
No.
Ms. DeLuca?
No.
Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Cresser?
Yes.
Mr. Lamarca?
No.
Mr. Mack?
No.
Mr. Meredith?
Yes.
Mr. Melky?
Yes.
Ms. Sortino?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
And Ms. Yandel?
Yes.
So
Essentially have
6.
7 for Mr. Lamarca and 6 for Mr. Meredith. So technically, it kind of throwing me off because Melanie's not here.
This illustrates an interesting point I was thinking about with a committee of 14 who breaks a tie.
Well,
So let's assume that Ms. Murray were here and were to vote for Mr. Meredith, and we have a 7-7 split. What happens in the case of a tie?
so typically a majority is what we go by in the commission rules. So a 7 is not a majority, so essentially we have 2 failures here. We have 2 non-passes here. Because that's what I was getting to, the 8 is
Interesting.
what we need. So 7 is 50%, you need a majority, which would be
Right.
8.
But isn't one, aren't we missing one?
No, but what he's
Yeah.
saying is you have to have a firm majority. So in order to have that, that's 8 people. So that breaks it. So you lose if there's a tie, it's a nullity, right? And then you start over, basically.
So we're back to,
So
right
we-
now would be a good time to open up for
Discussion.
campaigns. Why one over the other?
Or we make a new nomination of new candidates. So with that, I would nominate Alex Jones as the vice chairman.
Mr. Jones, are you willing to serve as vice chairman?
I'm willing.
Are there any other nominations for vice chairman?
Can we put Drew back up? if you
Certainly
want?
can nominate, we have a whole new election now. Yes,
I nominate Drew Meredith.
and obviously you're willing to serve as vice chairman.
Yes.
Any other nominations for vice chairman? Now, who are we voting for now?
Mr.
That's one
Jones?
first.
Clerk Cresser, we call the roll
Okay, so this would be for Alex Jones,
for vice chairman, yes.
for vice chairman. Mr. Berquist?
Yes.
Ms. Castillo?
No.
Mrs. Corso?
Yes.
Ms. DeLuca?
No.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Cresser?
No.
Mr. Lamarca?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
No.
Mr. Meredith?
No.
Mr. Melky?
No.
Ms. Sortino?
No.
Mr. Whalen?
No.
Ms. Yandel?
No.
Clerk Cresser, will you give us those numbers?
So 4 to 9, so 4.
I'm glad I could break that tie for you guys.
Lost twice in 1 year.
I know. Oh, this is a new year, new
Nice.
calendar. Come on.
That was low blow.
That was a low.
Just kidding.
Still gotta be official.
Now we need to vote for Mr. Meredith.
Okay, so Mr. Meredith for Vice Chairman. Mr. Berquist?
Yes?
Ms. Castile?
Yes.
Mrs. Corso?
No.
Ms. DeLuca?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Cresser?
Yes.
Mr. Lamarca?
No.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Meredith?
Yes.
Mr. Melky?
Yes.
Ms. Sortino?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
And Mrs. Sandell?
Yes.
Mr. Presser, will you give us the count?
So it would be 10 yeas and 3 nays for Mr. Meredith.
We have a majority, so we have a chairman in Mr. Milky, and we have a vice chairman in Mr. Meredith. Mr. Milky, the rest of the meeting is yours.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, everybody, and we may look back on this vote and decide that we didn't really win anything at all. But anyways, so dates of future meetings is the next thing on the list, and Mrs. Cresser gave me some information before the meeting that Mondays and Wednesdays, I think it was, or the first and third Monday. Oh, I thought that's what you said.
Chairman, no, so it looks like the first and fourth Mondays of
Okay.
each month, I'm sorry,
Are open.
wait a minute. First. The first Mondays, everyone is available.
Okay, so let's not overcomplicate it. So is the first Monday of every month a go for everyone? Apparently, there was a poll that works for everybody, so look at that, the first Monday of each month. And then from a time perspective, is this the time that would typically work for everyone? 5 o'clock on Monday?
I'm good with it.
Yes.
Okay. So then we would say that we're going to meet on the first Monday of each month at 5 PM. And I'm sorry, the length of the meetings are just, is there a set time for the meeting? 5 to, or just,
I think that would
it's
be
up to us?
the committee members
Okay.
to decide.
So what's your pleasure in terms of giving ourselves, I think we'll do better work if we have kind of a set amount of time that keeps us moving but doesn't kind of rush us through the process. So is 2 hours enough for this, or is it more like a 3-hour meeting, 5 to 8 or 5 to 7 is what I would throw out there for consideration, but I'd invite everyone to give their input.
I'd go 5 to 7 and then take it from there.
I second
See what
that.
happens.
Okay, 5 to 7 without a hard stop. I mean, if we've got something that we can finish, we'll do that, but we'll plan from 5 to 7.
Works.
All right, on the first Monday of each month. Okay, and so the next one, the identification of issues to discuss it at the next meeting. And so as we go through this, there's, almost 90 different provisions, but they're not all that long. And so I don't know, I mean, one way to attack this is to start at the top and to break them into pieces, and then give ourselves the assignment that when we come back, we're going to go over, for example, maybe at the next meeting, we might, say we're going to go through 1 through 15 or whatever it is. And one question before we do that is, how, I've understood that this is like 6 or 8 meetings is what we should be thinking in the terms of that, but you guys.
Deadline for the ballot. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Just so you're aware, there's no requirement that we're up in the November
Okay.
ballot, but if we wanted to get anything on the November ballot, the drop dead date that the city commission would have to send something to the Board of Election is August 17th.
Okay,
So
that's
we're
good.
technically complying with the charter now by having it in 2020. If we can't get anything on the ballot till next spring, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
So if that's the August 17th, back it up to when we have to have it submitted to you. August 1st?
By the end of July.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if we're only going to have one meeting a month, that's insufficient.
Yeah, I think that, I was just thinking the same thing. That's a heavy lift to like really, maybe we should have 2 a month and then we could get this work done. I think it might be a better flow. I think, to me,
I
that's
agree,
good.
especially if we may have a need to have something go to a vote, to the voters. And
Yeah, I agree. Yes, Ms.
Do our Monday meetings affect the city commission meeting at all? No?
We're second, or they're second.
Second and fourth.
Okay.
So if we did 1 and 3, would that be
Yeah,
acceptable?
first and third Monday, does that work for everybody?
I cannot come on the third Monday at 5.
Okay. All right. What's, do you have an alternative? Is it the time of the day or is it just
I
that
could come
day?
at 6, but I can't come at 5.
Okay. Would everybody be willing to come at, we go 6 to 8 on the third Monday of the
That would
month?
work for me.
Does that work for everyone?
Yeah, sure.
So, Mr. Chairman, Melanie has trustee meetings on those evenings. So I know that she said I think that she would be available like before 6, so the opposite of.
Okay.
Well, why don't we do, could we do Monday, the first Monday and the third Wednesday, something like that? Or does that mess too many people up?
It's starting to get a little confusing to jiggle all the other schedules I have
Wednesday
too.
might be a planning commission or
All
something.
right.
Yeah, the
I'm just throwing
Wednesdays
it out
are
there.
tough
Makes
for me.
Monday or Wednesdays are good with me.
I have no problem with 2 meetings a month, but I'd like to say pretty much unanimous on the times, just
Yeah.
from a
Consistency.
scheduling standpoint. And there's going to be times, at least one of us is not going to be able to make one meeting for
Yeah.
rotator cuff surgery down the road.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. So, all right, so, so did we, so the third Monday doesn't work for, at.
2.
Mrs. Yeah. What's, yeah, 2 people. Okay. So, all right, so, what about, is it just that third Monday? What if we did the first and the fourth Monday? Same time, is that?
Commission.
Oh, commission meeting, okay. All right, so then I heard a suggestion for Wednesday. What's that? Anybody got an issue with Wednesday from 5 to 7? And we're saying the third Wednesday of the month?
Fine.
So would it be the first and third Wednesday, or are we doing Monday and Wednesday?
I think we were saying the first Monday we had unanimity, so I
Okay.
don't want to mess that up. I have to actually look a little bit on. So just to, so the third, so that would put us back here on March 18th, if we're gonna, and I know I'm out of town that day. So let's look at the Wednesdays for a second. So let's do this by date, okay? So the meeting dates, if we went Monday, the first Monday of the month would be, and use in the third Wednesday would be in April, it would be April 6th.
It's a Thursday, isn't it?
And April 15th.
There you go.
16, 15.
Cool.
And then in May, it would be May 4th and May 20th.
What do we do without Braves?
In June, it would be June 1st and June 17th. And then in July, it would be July 6th and July 15th.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 8 meetings to get
Yep.
this wrapped up before the ballot, if there's something that needs to go on the ballot.
I think there's a good chance we may not need to go into July.
Yeah, right. I'm just laying it out there to make, that makes it a little bit easier for me.
Or if we gotta have an emergency meeting, we can set it up.
we're trying to make sure that we got the room to it. So
Yeah, that's, I think the best thing is to just start out with that. So while you're doing that, I could not be here on the third Wednesday in March. Should we try to pick an alternative date in March so that we can kind of get going that's in about 2 weeks from now, or what do you guys think about that?
Or have we looked at Thursdays at all? I mean, this meeting is Thursdays. Could we do the first and third Thursdays?
I can't do Thursday.
That's fine.
You can't do Thursday?
I can't
Okay.
do Thursday.
No?
We have leadership
Or do
Erie
any
County on
other-
Thursdays.
Okay,
Okay.
never mind.
No, there's nothing more difficult than 14.
Ultimately, we got 14 folks here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's gonna be tough.
Yeah, no, it's,
You're going to be missing somebody.
If I may, Mr.
yeah,
Chairman?
sure.
So it looks as if, based on the input that I got from everyone here, the first Monday is the obvious one. The second Wednesday, as opposed to
Okay.
the third Wednesday,
Okay.
there's only one person that may have a conflict on the second Wednesday.
Okay.
So, I mean, inevitably, you're going to catch someone, but that would be.
Yeah, and I may
That's
get.
fine.
I'm okay with
away.
that.
I may not even be.
For me.
Are you the person with the conflict?
No, it was me, but it's fine. My old ladies volleyball rec league is over by then.
All right, so let's reboot this thing. So, all right, so we're gonna go the first Monday. And the first and second Monday, we're just meeting back to back? Is that what we're saying?
Can't do that.
Yeah.
Second Wednesday.
Second Wednesday.
Second Wednesday, okay,
The second Wednesday.
okay, got it. Okay, so that's April 6th.
If you do the first Monday and the second Wednesday in April, you have the 6th and the 8th, which you don't want.
In which month was that? I'm sorry.
In April,
April.
the first Monday is the 6th, the second Wednesday is the 8th.
Yeah. So we could keep that on the 15th, or that's a conflict for you?
Maybe the third, well, somebody can't come on the third Wednesday, right?
There's three that would not be able to do the third Wednesday.
I would
Oh,
just,
and the chambers aren't available.
I was gonna say,
That's out.
let's convene at that point in April and say,
That's right,
what's a
we're
good
out that
day
whole
this
week.
month for everybody? Yeah.
So we're going to run into spring break. I'm out that week on the 15th.
Yeah,
Why don't we just decide at the first April
the first April meeting, we
Yeah,
want to meet the
okay.
second time.
All right. We have the same issue in July too, but we may not need that. So I think what we should do is kind of set this framework out, and then let's not be rigid. I mean, we can make the decision to move the dates around as we see fit, and it's kind of tough to do that right now because we don't know what the workflow is going to be like. And so I think, what does everybody think about coming back together on March 11th? And maybe we can take down a first few of these to give ourselves an opportunity to go to work, and then kind of figure out what that workflow looks like, and then take another look at what the dates are, and we might
Finding
adjust them, but
overlap.
for right now, I think we can submit a schedule of dates, and I'll walk through them here that we're gonna confirm, and then we'll, like, as someone suggested in the first one in April, we can kind of decide what that is. So I had March 11th, if everybody can do that, that would be the second Wednesday this month. Then April 6th. And then we'll have a placeholder for another one in April. May 4th. May 13th. June 1st. June 10th, and then July 6th.
Mr. Cresser, I won't be here at the April 6th, but I think we all can manage without me.
And I just realized I can't come on May 13th. I'm going to be out of town.
Take over.
Yeah. So I think I think what we should, let's put those markers down. We won't be rigid about it. Let's have our first meeting. Let's work a little bit, and then we can move these dates as we need, but I think we need some framing of some outposted dates that we should all put on our calendars so that we know we have those locked in. And if some of us can't make it for one, that's why you have 14 people on. We'll make sure that we observe a rule that as we come about, if there's hot topics where there isn't a consensus on what we should do, then we'll make it our rule amongst ourselves that we would always come back and discuss those things when all 14 people were there at the table. And that would be the assurance that we give people so that there's a little bit of flexibility in the meetings when you have other things come up. Does that sound like a fair protocol? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one thing, you said May 13th, but May 4th would be the first Monday?
Yeah, but the 13th's the second Wednesday, right?
Yes, but, so were you going to skip May 4th?
Oh, no, I mentioned May 4th, if I did say that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so then, is everybody comfortable with that? And then Kelly, will you put the, okay, great. So we'll have a list of those dates out, and then we'll move forward from there. So the identifications issue to discuss at the next meeting, I think one of the things that we can discuss there is, or maybe we can do a little bit now, is some of the protocols in terms of how we'll go about conducting the meeting. And I think one thing I would throw out there is that we should have a defined list of which articles we're going to read and discuss. And then we should have, everybody has that homework assignment to have read that and be ready to comment on it. And then I think probably with a list this long, the best thing to do is just to go through each one of them and kind of build a consensus around it. And then, like I said, if there's issues that arise as a result of it, and hopefully we'll have some robust discussions, we'd reserve the right to kind of put that in the parking lot for a moment and then kind of go get through our work and then go back and spend most of the time on the issues that really have generated the most input and need for discussion in terms of potential changes or modifications. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. All right. And so I think that if we're thinking in the terms of like 8 meetings, I think we're looking at reviewing between 12 and 15 of these. And again, when, looking at the charter, Drew, you have it right here. Yeah. I think, that it isn't that isn't too much to be able to review. I think these are possible to review in chunks of 12, I would say. Does that feel digestible to everyone?
Yes.
And so we would review, and maybe the first one we can get through 15 to give us a little, because some of the beginning ones are a little bit more perfunctory in nature. And so what I would say is let's do 1 through 16. The last one is price and mode of publication, and that seems to be like kind of the administrative end of the code. And so we review that in the first meeting. That'll give us a good opportunity to kind of all get used to the process of what we're doing, the review, and kind of get to know each other in terms of how we're going to go about forming the discussion. And then from that, that'll educate maybe how we go about preparing for the next meeting when the provisions begin to increase in complexity. And then we'll understand what our homework assignments are, and then that will also maybe format how much time we need to set aside and the frequency of the meetings and kind of any adjustments we want to make to the schedule. So I'd throw that out there as a suggested way forward. And at the risk of repeating myself, the basic gist is that at the next meeting, we would review the provisions 1 through 16, and we'd be prepared, and we would do that on March 11th at 5 o'clock in this chamber? Okay, does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay, and so let me pause there for a minute. I've been talking a lot. Is there any comments or anything else that anyone wants to add or bring up at this point in time that needs to be discussed this evening? Okay, hearing none, then we'll use that as as completing item 8 on the agenda of the identification of issues to discuss at the next meeting. And so with that, we would, the next item on the agenda is remarks from, first up, Eric Wutzer from the city manager. Eric?
Thank you, Chairman Milky. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for your service on the Charter Review Commission. I'm the city manager of the city. I think I've met everybody at least briefly, and I'm excited you're here. It's actually nice to sit on this side of the table and to watch other people struggle to make decisions on that side of the table. It can be hard. And so I'll just give a little bit of background on the organizational chart of the city, because we do have a relatively unique form of government, and that it's a commission manager form of government. It's not a strong mayor form of government that a lot of people are more historically used to. So in that case, we have 7 elected city commissioners, all of whom are elected in odd years, every other odd year, depending on which one, to 4-year terms. And then there are 2 charter officers in the government, my position as city manager, and then Clerk Krusser's position. In fact, we used to have 4 charter positions until the work of the last Charter Review Commission, in which they made a recommendation that the City Commission then passed on to voters, which were both approved, to take the law director position and the finance director position, which had been charter positions, and to place those under my office. And so the effect of that decision was that all employees of the city, other than Clerk Krusser, report to the City Commission through my office. And just to give a sense, now they're not all treated equally. In the charter, 4 of those positions actually remain in the charter, including the law director position and the finance director position. And when the charter change was made, what it did was it said that the finance director and the law director would each become an employee of the city manager, but before they could take office, that they had to be approved by a majority vote of the city commission. So there's still a check on my office on behalf of the city commission as it relates to those 2 positions. And then pre-existing in the charter, the police chief and the fire chief are selected, and we're actually underway with the police chief search now. So for those of you who want to observe how that goes, the city commission, I believe 2 meetings ago, appointed, and this is per the charter, appointed a search committee of community leaders to help review an application process for a new police chief. And that committee is in the process now of getting together to review applications, which are due, I believe, last Friday. And then the way that the charter works for both the fire chief position and the police chief position is that committee will make 3 finalist recommendations to my office, and then I will interview those 3 finalists, check references, et cetera, and then pick one among those 3. So there are checks for those 2 positions as well. It just works in a slightly different way, in which in one situation I manage the search process and then get an approval from the city commission. In the other, the city commission manages that process through their committee, and then ultimately the final decision is up to me with the final candidates that they have. So those are just some examples. In addition to that, there are about 6 other positions that report to the city manager that are outside of the positions directly in my office. The reason we have a police chief vacancy is because Chief Orzek is actually transitioning from that role once that final decision is made as to the new police chief, and will be an assistant city manager, which is not a charter position, but is one that has existed in the city in the past. In addition to that, I have an executive assistant and a communications specialist that work in my office. And so in addition to those 3 positions, and then the 4 positions that are mentioned in the charter, we have a planning director that reports directly to me. We have a public works director. In our public works director, so planning oversees both zoning, but also setting sort of long-range plans for the city. We do our neighborhood outreach through that office. We also do public transportation through that office. And then in addition to that, we have an arts commission that is staffed through that office, as well as a landmarks commission. So they're a very active department within the city. The Public Works Department is probably our largest department in the city. It oversees our water operations, which include both distribution and the water plant, which treats the water before it goes through the distribution system, where we retail directly to customers in Sandusky, and then we sell water wholesale to Erie County, who then sells to other individuals. We also, so that's the front end of that system. The back end of that system is we have a sewer operation, which is also under Public Works, in which there's a collection system which oversees the infrastructure that brings the sewage back to our treatment plant and then the plant itself. In addition to that, engineering and construction, so all of our capital projects that we bid out and build are done through that, and that includes the reconstruction of our roads, our water systems, our sewer systems, our public facilities, our parks, when we purchase vehicles. And we've really ramped that up since the passage of Issue 8 several years ago. And then our service delivery outside of police and fire predominantly comes through our Public Works Department. We have a division of public service that oversees our streets, our forestry that takes care of the thousands of trees that exist in the city, park maintenance, facility maintenance, vehicle maintenance. I'm sure I'm missing at least one or two of the greenhouse, the cemetery operations, all of which flow under Public Works. So that's about 80 to 90 of our total employees of 250 total that we have with the city. And then we have a community development department in the city that oversees our economic development operations. We also set aside some specific funding directly for economic development when we passed Issue 8. And the reason that we were able to do that is because when we surveyed the public before we put that in the ballot, they did say that the revitalization of Sandusky, both through the creation of private investment and jobs, was a critical priority. And then we also set aside some funding for the redevelopment of the housing stock in Sandusky. And so we have a housing specialist that helps to oversee housing grant programs and delivery. In addition to that, she oversees the city's land bank, where we bank property. We own quite a bit of private property through that land bank. And we also, in kind of a unique arrangement, administer the county land bank program because we had a larger community development department at the city. And so when those funds became available and passed through to counties through the state, we entered into an agreement on a year-to-year basis to manage that program for Erie County. In addition to economic development, housing, and land banking, our community development department also oversees our code enforcement division, which is how we ensure that private property owners are maintaining to our codes their private property, and also the building department, which helps to ensure that the buildings in Sandusky are safe, both in their current condition as well as all projects for building projects become permitted. In addition to that, and planning, development, public works, we have an IT department. Chief Orzek will actually play a large role in helping oversee both IT and human resources. Part of the reason we wanted to create that position was there were 13 individual positions that were reporting to the city manager's office, and that can be pretty unwieldy. You get to the point where you're managing a lot of people, but you're not truly managing enough of them. And so Chief Orzek's got great experience as it relates to police, to fire, to HR, and to IT. IT originally, which is kind of a long story, but kind of grew up in the city through our police department, and it was a part-time retired police officers overseeing IT. But we have great people individually overseeing each of those areas, but I think they'll get better service from the manager's office on a day-to-day basis, with Chief being able to help be a liaison to me for those. I'm sure I'm leaving at least one. Our recreation department's also very important to us. They do both proactive events and programs in the city. We've taken that staff from a total of 1 employee to 3 employees over the last several years, which is why you see so much more activity going on in that. But then they also help permit the events that other people do in the city, and they're a really special part of the city. And so I'll just close by saying, you know, we've got 250 employees, and I think that we're really operating at a very high level right now. And that's because of very strong leadership on the city commission. And none of the employees, myself included, take for granted that we're not the elected officials and we're not the ones that are responsive directly to the citizens of the city of Sandusky. I, like all of you, serve at the pleasure of that city commission, and I take that role very seriously. And we try to be very responsive to what the commission is hearing from the public, and ultimately to make sure that what we're doing is in line both with what our residents want to see, but also sort of the professional opinions and best practices that the staff has developed through looking at other cities and benchmarking what's possible for Sandusky. But I'm a Sandusky native. It was really exciting almost 6 years ago to have the opportunity to come home and serve under the city commission. And I've witnessed firsthand that when people work together, like the previous charter commission, you can see meaningful change happen. Recommendations were made that were put to the ballot and were passed by the public. And I wouldn't take that for granted, because I think a lot of the things that you're going to review throughout this process are ultimately going to be put to that commission and then the public. And so staff is available to you. I'm sure, at least in the last process, there were presentations made by individual staff members or directors to talk about how the charter impacts their department, or to answer questions that this commission has asked from them. And I think I would view that sort of two-way communication as the best way maybe to navigate this process. There are things that you're going to find where you need information for us, and there's probably some things that both the commission and staff would like to present to you, because we are the ones living under that charter on a day-to-day basis and can ultimately, make recommendations potentially on what's working well and what isn't for you to consider. So that I'm happy to answer any questions, but I am very, very grateful for your service, and I think this is a very, very impressive group of Sandusky residents, and I'm excited to work with you over the next several months. So.
Okay, any questions for Eric? One thing I wanted to bring up, if you have an idea of if there are particular provisions in the charter that you want to do a presentation on, is if you could submit those to us so that we can plan for that in our meeting time, and then try to orchestrate that so that it's the timely, and we can have an expectation of when that might come up. And then just to go a step further on that, I assume that, so if throughout our deliberations we want you to present something, then we would just submit that as a request through your office or through Kelly? Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Next, Trevor Haberger, City Law Director.
So Trevor Haberger, City Law Director, and a lifelong resident. I'll probably be at most of these along with Kelly. The one thing, when I do foresee probably 3 or 4 sections that we have interest in that we would like to change. So we will be submitting those ahead of time. I do want to remind everybody that this is a commission, so we have to apply the open meetings issues. So if I send something out to you guys, do not reply all. You know what I mean by reply all? Like on an email, you can either reply to one person or you hit reply all. If you do that, technically we're getting towards what's called a discussion, which is a violation of the open meetings. So if I do send a template and you have a question, just email me directly. And then we'll keep those all together, and I can talk amongst you guys independently. And it'll work a lot easier that way. And that goes as well, not only stuff from me, but if Jeff, if you have a question and you and Connor are on the same page, if you guys keep it to yourselves, that's fine, but when we start sending it out to 8 or more people, now we're talking about, we have a quorum of the people, so let's just try to stay away from emails. We want to have the discussions here, so it's all open and transparent. That's the big issues. I wasn't going to give you my cell until I found out this is going to be on YouTube. So if you want to contact Kelly, it'd be real easy to find my cell anyway. If you want to contact Kelly, you guys would have my cell phone number. Feel free to contact me at any time. Email is the same as Kelly's, except the suffix is the same. Prefix is T Haberger, Hayberger. Other than that, I'll see you every month.
So one question I have on that is, from a public records perspective, if people take notes about what they want to bring to the meeting and talk about, can you give everyone a little bit of an education of how that works from a public records perspective, and whether or not they need to keep those notes, whether or not they are public record or they're not public record? Could you provide us a little more information on that?
Yeah. Typically, notes are not public record. That being said, I'm always err on the side of, if we have it, let's give it up. So if you have it, if you keep it, generally I advise to turn it over, but generally they're not public record. But so when you're making notes, make sure you're not writing down anything you don't want on the front page.
So one other thing embedded in what you said, so they're not public records. So if they're not public records along the obligation, because some might ask, do I have an obligation to keep my notes? Do I have to have a notebook that I keep all my notes in so that at the end I have that record or not? It sounds like the answer to that question is you do not need to keep your notes, but if you do, understand that they would be potentially subject to disclosure, and that you should take notes with that in mind. But it sounds like we do not need to retain the notes. The official records will be kept through Mrs. Cresser.
And that's what I was gonna say, if you do keep anything, don't keep it yourself. When this is all done and over, turn it over to Clerk Cresser. Because the public records request won't be coming to you individually, it'll be coming to us, so.
Okay.
If you do keep anything, let's just give it to Kelly.
Just a question, since it is a public meeting, will anyone in the audience be allowed to comment or not comment, or?
So technically, the way open meetings work, you have the right to hear, not the right to be heard is the saying. So you have the right to be here, right to listen. If this commission decides that they want to have input from anybody, there's nothing that would, as a general rule, we have the right to hear, not to be heard, but this commission decided.
Okay. Just curious.
Okay. Okay, with that discussion completed, is there any other questions that anyone has for this evening while we have the group assembled here that we can get some answers from?
Mr. Chairman, we've got 16 provisions to review for next week. And if there's an item that I would like additional information on, where do I direct that?
I believe to Clerk Cresser.
You don't want me to go through you, just direct to?
I mean, I think the idea of that, as I understand it, is that she's the keeper of the information. I mean, you're free to reach out to me. I'm always willing to be helpful, but I'll have to go to her to get the information.
I just want to be sure of the direction I go.
I think that's a really good question. So for all of us, gathering information can be an individual pursuit. You need to do the research and to get the background that you feel is necessary in order to come to the meeting prepared. And Clerk Cresser is the conduit for that information from the city's perspective. But like I said, anybody that has any process or questions or anything about the meeting, feel free to reach out to me directly to talk about things like that. Be very open to that. But I think from an information or from a homework perspective, the Clerk Cresser would have that information. Does that responsive to your?
Well, that's fine. Mr. Haberger's got a comment.
You're probably gonna say the same thing
Yep.
I am, so I'll let Kelly go.
Well, so, Mr. Chairman, what I was going to say is, if there's a question that comes through me and I gather information for that person and it's pertinent to what you're doing here as a group, I would distribute that information back out to all of you.
That's fine.
Us, the person asking, and you as chair.
Yeah, that's fine. I like the good transparency. Okay. Was that what you were going to say?
Along those similar lines, like if you have a question, let's say it applies to maybe Aaron at engineering, I would still work through Kelly, and then Kelly can get a hold of Aaron, or something to do with the police chief. And the point person should be.
Yeah, single point of contact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I was wondering, just a thought, if we have thoughts like on issue 1 through 16 already, is that something that we want to bring up maybe now, so as we read through, we kind of have that in mind? If somebody's going to bring something up next meeting.
Yeah, I mean,
Personally, I would like to read the charter with that thought in mind.
Yeah. Yes.
Obviously, a lot of people aren't going to have the thoughts until they comb through that section, but
yeah, I mean, we can pose that question. As we sit here, are there any, and so we're focused on provisions 1 through 16, which are kind of the ministerial parts of the charter. Does anybody, and if you haven't had a chance to review it, don't feel like, I think the point is if you have an opinion on that you'd like to share with folks right now, then that would be good background for the review going forward. So I would open the floor to that for any comments that we might have on provisions 1 through 16 that you would like to offer to the group. Yes.
Well, again, I'm going to discuss salaries and bonds. I think that our commissioners are grossly underpaid when looking at commissioners throughout the state. So that's on my agenda.
Yeah, even looking at inflation rates since it was last evaluated in 2000. It's been 20 years.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Along the same lines, I have the same issue. Right now, our city councilmen, or our city commissioner are not getting a full year's PERS credit. We are below the monthly, there is an minimum earned salary that you have to have per month in order to get a year's OPERS credit, and we're below that. So I was going to be bringing something to at least get us to the minimum set by OPERS. A year's credit.
What is the minimum?
That applied to?
The minimum is, I broke it down, it's $673.08 a month, which ends up being, right now our charter says $100 per week. If we did the bare minimum, it would take us to $155.33 a week. But you can go higher than that. That's the bare minimum, and
That's a
according to
qualifying
OPERS,
amount.
that's supposed to be good between now and 2029. But what I would do is I wouldn't say a number, I would say salary commensurate with the minimum earned salary available for OPERS or something along those lines.
To establish a minimum the input of that would be that the salary would always be enough to qualify for that. Okay.
So they wouldn't have to change their charter every time OPERS changes.
Through the chair.
Like a no less than, yeah.
Through the chair to Trevor, could you set it where, let's just say, I'm just making this up, but they wanted to go to say 12,000, but that if eventually OPERS went above that, it would adjust, so they don't have to set it to the minimum, they could set it to another number, but then put a caveat in that if that number rises and you fall below a full year's credit, you could adjust.
Yeah.
We would simply word it X amount or no less than the minimum
Yeah.
salary for OPERS.
Okay. Okay. That was, item 6. Are there any other provisions that folks would want to offer?
There was a question, just, everybody knows what OPERS is, right? And I don't want to.
Sorry, that was my
No,
question.
and that's not to shed light, but, because I work for the state of Ohio, OPERS is just another one of the alphabet soup things, so.
I tend to use acronyms without explaining that.
I get it.
I'm used to that.
So Ohio Public Employment Retirement System.
Thank you.
Their state pension.
Basically our retirement system.
That's a good note to cut the acronyms. That's hard to do in government. All right, so anything else that anyone would like to raise for the benefit of the others in the room in their review that as something that they would point to consider in that review process?
I can,
Yes.
if I would want to make sure I didn't get in front of any of the charter commissioners. Staff, I'd be in big trouble with staff if I didn't mention, and it's very similar in some ways to commission salary. Right now, the minimum amount that staff can spend without requiring legislation from the city commission is $10,000. The state minimum for local governments is actually $50,000, and we just hired a new finance director from Norwalk, which is about half our size, which links theirs to the state are also $50,000. There are very, very small transactions that we have to prepare legislation for. And it's really not so much the oversight of the commission at that number, but there's an incredibly burdensome amount of staff time that can go into preparing that. And so we'd like to see potentially that be right-sized. Our public works director makes the vast majority of those legislative requirements. And the only thing we'd ask at this time is that you bring him in and maybe our finance director to speak to you about why the 10,000 can be a challenge and maybe linking that to the state level similarly to the, that's section 25, sorry, I should have mentioned that in the beginning. But again, this is just something we'd like a chance to discuss with you for your consideration at the appropriate time in your process.
Yeah, that probably would be the second meeting we can, so we should, since you brought that up, we'll kind of try to coordinate that so that we have that information. So I think that's a real good a process point to put in as we go through these meetings. Maybe that's how we'll close out each meeting, is if people have read ahead. And then we can say, hey, if you've seen that and you would like to share something to help with the review or share perspectives, that will make for a more productive next meeting. So, okay? All right, anything else on 1 through 16? All right. Hearing none. Anything else for the good of the order tonight?
One quick question for Kelly, as far as copies, should we print out our own to bring? Is that something we can put up on the boards and save some paper? Or, I mean, can it be available here?
Sure. So, Mr. Chairman, generally I send everything electronically. If you want anything printed, you just send me an email to ask me.
Even on.
Yeah, the screens that we had, what we're looking
That
at.
would do.
The agenda,
Saving
the
it.
agenda on the screen?
No,
The
like
charter.
the section of the charter that we're discussing, so that we all have it, you know.
I got you, written
Two people's
out.
phones are dead.
Okay,
I
okay,
don't
sure,
have a copy with me.
yes.
Yep.
Right.
I have one more question. Having never reviewed a city charter, do we have any prime examples of cities who run very effectively that we could compare to?
Mr. Chairman, what I have found in reviewing the charter is there are a host of, I will call it boilerplate sections to a variety of city charters. And when I look for something like that, what I do is I don't end up with Chicago, Illinois. I don't end up in New York. I try to tailor it around a city of our size, certainly a city of our type of government. And you can find very good both background information and sections of charters that pertain to exactly what you're thinking of. I recently was looking for something under qualifications for city commissioners, and I think we lack that in great detail in our charter now. And I was interested in looking, I think I looked at maybe Ypsilanti, Michigan, but I tried to stay in a city that was our size and not get out of bounds with that. But yeah, those are things that, you know, staff can provide you with a broad range of those also.
It used to be called Walter Drain. It's spelled D-R-A-N-E. They used to house all the codes for most of Ohio. They've since been bought out, so I'm trying to find, I think it's like American Legal or something along those lines.
Could we have that sent to us electronically, like a link to that, and then that way, that would be a good resource?
Yes.
And I think one thing to say about that, that's a good reservoir for information, but I think the first sort is just to read it for what it tells the city to do. And then apply your own common sense to that and your own experience and say, does this make sense? And if it doesn't, or you feel like it needs more depth, then you can use that resource to kind of help, like, what have other people done? But I think we all have to remember, don't forget that, you know, this is our governance for our city, and so that's why we're all up here, for how you think about it. And then you can go to that. So don't skip that step. But if we could have that reservoir of information, that's a helpful way to kind of coalesce what you're thinking about and how you might want to express it formally. So, okay, those are all really good questions. Anything else?
Kelly, can you make these signs bigger so I can read them? It's a long way away over there, you know, come on.
Okay, all right. If there's nothing else, then the next meeting is scheduled for March 11th from 5 to 7 p.m. And we're going to go over Charter 1 through 16. And I think one of the things I would say is, as you review it, be prepared to come in and discuss, you know, either you're not recommending any changes, or you are recommending a change. And if so, what's your rationale for that change? Is kind of a framing I would put with that. And then if there's a request for additional charter provisions that fall kind of within the general scope of this is the basic foundational, like, administrative functions and how they work. It's at the commission level, actually, when you look at it, and then it moves down. So anything in that area that maybe you might say, hey, we should think about, additional, that's where reviewing the other charters might be a good place for information if you're thinking about a topic. But, so I just repeat that, either no changes, a change is recommended, and what's that rationale, or any additional provisions that are responsive to the area that we're kind of roaming around in the charter. That's kind of how I would frame your doing the homework, so that we can have a good, robust, organized discussion at the next meeting. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Moved.
Motion and second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion adjourned. Thank you.